moves. But I'm left right now at this point in time with two major options before me. One is to support the status quo option, which I've said from the beginning is the worst option available. We do not want that option, or the balanced
20 seconds.
Or the balanced model option. And I believe at this time, with what I have before me, that is the model that I will support. I did attempt to make amendments, as people know, earlier today, but based on what is left before us, that is the option which I'll be supporting at this time.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And hello, everyone from Stittsville on the western edge of the current urban boundary. I just wanted to mention I'm calling in today from my home, which is a block away from 3 transit routes, a short walk to a grocery store and pharmacy, and a quick bike ride to my favorite coffee shop, Quitters, along the Trans-Canada Trail. So yes, communities like this are not only possible in the suburbs, they also already exist. I'm going to read a line from the report that Council approved back in December about the official plan policy direction. Staff wrote, "There is no automobile-centered solution to maintaining livability while growing to 1.4 million and beyond." My motto over the past few weeks has been it's not about where we grow, but how we grow. And the decision today about where we're going to grow is important, but the next stage in the official plan is even more significant, where we actually finalize the policies that tell us how we're going to grow. And there are 2 areas that we really need to keep our focus on. First, residents want to live in a place where they don't have to travel far to get to work or groceries, but often our suburbs fall short of this ideal. We need funding for transit especially and other infrastructure to shorten the gap between when homes are built and when there are amenities to support them. And that's how we're going to achieve 15-minute communities and complete communities. And the second area that we need to keep focusing on is mobility, how we get around our city, within our neighborhoods and beyond. And this is so important to get right. If we're growing to 1.4 million people, we need to shift people from cars to buses and trains and to bikes and walking, and that means we're going to need a major shift in how we think about things and pay for things in our city. And I support the staff recommendation for balanced growth based on the 5 big moves, the vision and the policy that we've already adopted, but I have a real concern about approving expansion and seeing future councils turn away from these best intentions, because we've done that in the past. And I don't think the way that a lot of the parts of our cities have developed in the last 50 years has been a good thing. So there is a risk here. We've already approved an excellent set of policy directions from staff around the 5 big moves, growth around transit and 15-minute neighborhoods and denser, more walkable communities. I don't think there's anyone in this council who would disagree with these ideas. We need to make sure we actually follow through on these concepts. We have to ensure that new development doesn't fall prey to short-term vision and return to patterns of sprawl and car dependency that we've seen over the past few decades. And we can do that, and we actually have to do that if we're going to live in a livable city of 1.4 million people. Expansion does not have to equal sprawl. Our staff has done some excellent work on this. It's up to us on council and future councils to make sure that what gets written into the official plan is actually implemented and executed. We're going to need some really strong leadership from this council and future councils to see this through. So just to wrap up, a thank you to all the public and residents and stakeholders who provided feedback. We had a great meeting back in October about the official plan at Johnny LaRue Arena near Stittsville Main Street. Had a huge turnout, great discussion. Thank you to my team. We've, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, so many late-night phone calls and weekend phone calls about this. To Steve Willis and his staff, they've been incredible at answering our questions and being patient with councillors. And thank you as well to my council colleagues for what has been mostly a constructive debate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and I encourage everyone to go visit Quitters, a great business in your ward. I want to begin my remarks by thanking Chair Harder and Chair El-Shantiri for their leadership. I can't think of a better team to lead us through the city building discussion because of their years of experience. I'd also like to thank the sponsors group consisting of Councillors Harder, El-Shantiri, Leeper, Tierney, Moffat, and Gower. Thank you for the months of hard work that have gone into this comprehensive review that started in April of 2019. I also want to take a moment to thank staff for their professionalism and dedication and for putting up with, quite frankly, a lot of abuse over these last 18 months as they've shepherded this complex process. Particularly, I want to thank Stephen Willis for his professional and diligent leadership of this process, and please extend Council's thanks to your team for their tremendous work to date on the official plan, Mr. Willis. And I want to thank Robin Guest in my office, Director of Policy, who's been on this file since the beginning. Je remercie tous ceux qui ont
I'd like to thank all those who have spent hundreds of hours on this review over the past year. Our elected officials and also our devoted staff.
Extensive citywide consultations on the official plan. You know, I've heard, and you read through social media, oh, this is being rushed. Well, this is the 78th meeting that has been part of this process. Staff have overseen dozens and dozens of stakeholder meetings with community association, industry stakeholders, ambassador groups, traditionally underrepresented communities and representatives Indigenous groups involved with treaty discussions with other levels of government. The joint meeting of planning and ARAC in May set a historic record for a non-traditional meeting held electronically with over 100 delegations heard. And I've received nothing but positive feedback about how effective that meeting was run. It was, according to the vast majority of participants, a very democratic gathering, demonstrating that our municipal democracy is alive and well, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the over 100 public delegations that participated in the Joint Planning and Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee meetings in May, and the over 45,000 residents and stakeholders that have been part of the process through open houses and the like. I had the opportunity to listen to much of the debate at the Joint Committee. I was impressed by the time and thoughtfulness that went into the public presentations and the engaging and insightful questions asked by members of committee. I
listened to the debate and I was impressed by the quality of presentations as well as the questions that I heard.
And strengthened by competing media stories, social media commentary, and opinion polls. In the last few days, we've heard about 2 polls with apparently conflicting results. One was sponsored by the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. The other poll was sponsored by a handful of local councillors in the core, a poll whose findings ECOS had to issue a clarification about. Here's what the president of the polling company had to say once he had reviewed the conflicting interpretations over his data, and I quote, well, maybe we should be modestly expanding the urban boundary, end quote. Many in the development industry wanted much more land added to the urban boundary, and many community and environmental activists wanted 0 land added to the urban boundary. That tells me the Council is landing exactly where it should, in the middle of these competing extremes. The
committee's recommendation is the right one. I think it's a middle ground between opposing groups.
Nice black and white survey filled with yes or no questions that provided elected officials and the public with a perfect outcome. Most members of Council know that this is not what we have before us today. What we have is a test of leadership about the future of our city. It's a test of our ability to juggle the competing demands and interests that come from governing a fast-growing city, a city that is attracting literally tens of thousands of people every month to come and live here. Nous devons prendre la bonne décision pour...
We have to take the right decision to meet the needs of our city, which is growing.
Most members of Council understand that if we make it very, very difficult for people who want to come to Ottawa to find the housing they desire in Ottawa, then many of these residents will elect to move to other cities and villages outside our borders. And when that happens, we see tens of thousands of homes being built outside our city, and these same households will contribute even greater congestion to our road and transit infrastructure while contributing absolutely nothing to the city's coffers. And that is not a good deal for Ottawa residents nor taxpayers. And here's another fact to take into account. People want to live here in greater and greater numbers, as I said earlier. It's a tremendous city to live in, with great neighborhoods, amazing green spaces that are the envy of many Canadian cities. Money Sense magazine listed us for 2 years in a row the best city to live and raise a family. No wonder we have an important debate about managing growth. Too much of this debate appears to have been driven by hard ideological and philosophical positions, and that's unfortunate. Something that seems to have been somewhat ignored and torqued to score ideological points on the issue of affordability. I heard and read during this debate that an expansion of the urban boundary would hurt our city's most vulnerable residents. Well, this is an outright fallacy, and it has to be challenged. It is quite evident to anyone who has had the opportunity to look at any housing market in North America where supply has been severely constrained. In those markets, great two examples in Canada, Vancouver and Toronto, supply constraints have led to sharp increases in the price of housing, making it harder and harder for low-income families, the working poor, new Canadians to acquire their own property. As recently as 6 to 8 weeks ago, we saw examples through the city of families lining up in bidding wars for housing. Realtors tell me all the time there are not enough houses on the market for sale, and that, of course, pushes the price up. Houses with multiple bids, $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, or even $100,000 or more over the asking price were becoming all too common. I'm surprised that some members of council, with all the fresh evidence around us, do not see what happens when there is not enough market supply for housing. It hurts first-time home buyers, new Canadians, and low-income families disproportionately. This is another good reason to support the balanced scenario as presented by staff. The decision
we'll make today to offer our residents a better mix of housing units and will help residents to purchase a property.
Obligation as members of council to ensure that the next generation has housing choice and that we have an obligation to do our best to support housing affordability. That includes both market housing, social housing, and affordable rental housing. The balanced plan does that well. Today, we're being asked to set the direction for our growth management strategy, the strategy that will guide our city and how it will grow to 2046 and beyond. We've heard from residents that they want our city to grow in a way that minimizes the need to expand the urban boundary by making the most efficient use of the urban lands we already have. However, our city will have to accommodate more than 400,000 new residents by 2046. Just think about that for a minute, 400,000 new residents. That's bigger than Nepean when it joined the new city of Ottawa, bigger than Canada, bigger than Goulburn, bigger than Vanier. That's 40% more people than our current population. The balanced strategy that is being recommended by staff and carried by the Joint Committee by a vote of 10 to 1 accomplishes two goals. It provides for a very modest expansion of our existing urban area, roughly 3 to 4% growth. The balanced scenario ensures that the majority of our city's growth takes place in already established neighborhoods. In this balanced scenario, 51% of new dwelling units will need to be in existing built-up areas, with an intensification target that rises to 60% by 2046. At a 60% intensification rate, Ottawa will have one of the most aggressive intensification targets in all of Canada. A small handful of members of council consistently talk in support of intensification while opposing it when it comes into their ward. And I gave examples in the past, and you can see them all over the Planning Committee minutes. We have heard from the vast majority of residents that they support intensification, but they want it to be done thoughtfully, with good design, while respecting the character of established communities. And I think that's something that Councillor Leeper spoke eloquently of a few moments ago.
Residents want more density, but they also want buildings that are in line with the character of the ward.
See intensification accompanied by the appropriate infrastructure investments to support growth. The funding for this infrastructure will be refined through these important planning documents after today's vote. Some of you would like to delay the vote until after the financial analysis is completed, but that's not the way to go. To get an accurate, as Mr. Willis pointed out, a meaningful financial analysis, we need to define the specific requirements that will guide growth in each of our unique communities and neighborhoods as identified through the upcoming master planning process. And remember, this plan doesn't open up development on new lands overnight. As our GM indicated, planning for new lands can take a decade. We've also heard from residents that they want intensification and urban expansion to be targeted to areas near existing or planned transit hubs. That is what our balanced strategy does and is key priority of our TMP and our commitment to sustainable transportation. We've seen already great examples of transit-oriented development in Councillor Tim Tierney's ward right next to Blair Station. One tower is up, apartments, another one is being built, and I believe 2 or 3 more that will help to not only bring more people on LRT, but revitalize the Gloucester Centre, which is just across the street. And we've received positive community feedback with the idea of compact 15-minute neighborhoods across our city. Thanks to the direction and motion from Councillors Gower and Hubley, I'm pleased that staff will strengthen the tools to put 15-minute neighborhoods at the centre of decision-making from the outset of new development plans. The focus on a 15-minute neighborhood will expand the number of areas where people can live without a car thanks to the proximity of more amenities. The balanced strategy provides strong protections for rural Ottawa and our rural way of life. And this was one of the most important aspects that I insisted be protected, our rural landscapes and prime agricultural land. If we've learned anything from COVID-19, it's the importance of the food chain management and of local homegrown food security. Nous devons protéger dès aujourd'hui.
We must protect right away our agricultural land so that we can feed our community in the further future.
Further strengthen and protection of the city's prime agricultural land that is critical to our rural communities and to our local economy. And thanks to the strong teamwork and input from our rural councillors, DeRuse and Moffat, and the never-ending support by Councillor Harder for rural Ottawa. The recommended approach also maintains the 1 kilometre buffer around existing rural villages to help ensure the unique character of our villages remains distinct. Much of the development will be through intensification with some modest growth to the boundary on lands that are not agricultural, wetlands, floodplains, or other important natural areas. It's important that we find a balanced approach that considers affordability, community needs, smart growth opportunities, responsible intensification, and protections of our food supply. The balanced plan as presented by staff achieves these goals, and I strongly support it. J'appuie fortement ce plan qui est devant.
And I strongly support that plan because it offers the best balance between all the priorities.
Members of Council recognize that a no expansion scenario is unrealistic as it reduces housing choices across our city. Today is an important step in providing high-level direction to staff on preparing a new official plan for our city. Staff will take high-level directions today and do more work to write a full document with more refined policies, maps, and implementation details. The next time Council sees the plan, which we can expect sometime in 2021, it will be a complete document which will replace the outdated official plan we have today. I encourage all members of Council to support the balanced approach recommended by staff and by the joint meeting of the Planning and ARAC committees. Deputy Clerk, yeas and nays on the report as amended, please.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli, Councillor Deans, Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Conseiller Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Conseiller Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes. Yes.
That's a yes. 15 yeas, 6 nays.
Motion portant adoption d'un rapport. Councillor Moffat, please. Second by Councillor Dudas.
That the report from the Integrity Commissioner entitled Interim Report to Council on Inquiry respecting the conduct of Councillor Shirelli, Planning Committee and Agricultural Affairs Committee Joint Report 3 and Planning Committee Report 23 be received and adopted as amended.
On the motion, carried. Motions of which have been notice has been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Motion by myself, second by Councillor Tierney. Just a couple of brief comments. So we're almost 3 months into the global COVID-19 pandemic, and the depth of this crisis and the corresponding economic impact to municipalities are starting to sink in. Nous commençons à en prendre davantage sur les impacts du virus. Municipalities, as we all know, across Canada are working around the clock to provide a broad range of essential services, social services for our most vulnerable residents, public transit, fire, paramedic, police, support for local economic development and tourism, clean drinking water, solid waste collection and recycling, and much more. We must also consider the impact of this pandemic on future budgets, as I think we all know that recovery will take time. Unlike the provincial and federal governments, municipalities, of course, are not allowed or permitted by law to run a deficit. Residents expect municipalities to deliver the core services needed to keep our city moving and its people safe. Nobody wants to cancel or delay existing and planned capital projects to stay solvent. I'm sure everyone agrees that we need to continue maintaining our roads, filling potholes, keeping our assets in a state of good repair, not to mention that we need to keep the momentum going on large infrastructure projects like LRT and the new Central Library to fuel economic recovery from this pandemic. Il ne faut pas oublier le progrès sur les projets comme le train léger.
Let's not forget the progress on our light train, too.
Transit ridership, as we heard today, the closing of recreation facilities and libraries, and a significant decrease in revenues across the board have left municipalities facing short-term cash flow problems and long-term financial plans. Add to this the rising costs and the complex operational realities of protecting the most vulnerable in our community. There's no question that our frontline workers need to be supported to stay safe while delivering these critical services. Municipalities are being challenged to modify our operations to protect the services residents rely on: garbage collection, recycling, sewage treatment, social services, to name just a few. And you've heard from our city treasurer that she is tracking net losses of $66 million by June, $123 million by September, and $186 million come December. That's why today, Councillor Tierney and I are moving this motion to support the FCM and AMO and LUMCO and BCMC in their respective lobbying efforts with the federal and provincial governments for this crucial one-time emergency transit and operating funding for our city and all municipalities across Canada. For example, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, is calling on the federal government to commit to emergency operating funding of at least $10 billion in a one-time transfer for local governments to use as needed. This would allow cities, towns, villages across the country to continue keeping residents safe and supported. And we need this emergency funding sooner rather than later. Councillor Tierney and I are asking members of council to please support this motion and the efforts of AMO, FCM, and LUMCO and Big City Mayor's Caucus. I'd like to take a moment to thank Councillor Brockington for his work on the city's behalf on this issue with AMO as our representative on the board. We need to acquire this much-needed federal and provincial funding for emergency operations and transit recovery. This funding is key to our local and national economic recovery. By working together, we can ensure that the residents of Ottawa continue to receive world-class essential services and that Ottawa remains in a solid financial position. Cities are, as we know, the engines of the economy, and we can't move towards a meaningful economic recovery phase without the help of our federal and provincial partners. So I ask for your support on the motion, and Councillor Tierney as our seconder, if you'd like to offer some comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it brief. You've really summed it up, but, FCM representing 2,000 member municipalities across the country. I speak with my board on a regular basis. As Ontario Caucus Chair, I speak to many. Certainly there, it's becoming more of a challenge. We've heard it with Mayor Don Iverson out in Edmonton, all the way to John Tory, and nobody wants to see massive tax increases. We need this one-time help, and so much so that I even had a great conversation with Sean McKenney of the Labour Council that is fully supportive of this action as well. And I want to thank you for helping assemble this motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington is our AMO rep.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to yourself and Councillor Tierney for the motion. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario is actively engaged in advocating for municipalities across Ontario, similar to what we've heard from both the Mayor and Councillor Tierney. Municipalities are in a very tight financial situation, and comparable municipalities to Ottawa face similar challenges. So they are absolutely in agreement with this motion and are advocating for the City of Ottawa as well. So we need this motion. I think this motion is good, sets the right tone, and it underscores the need that municipalities have during the pandemic.
Others to speak on the motion? No? Okay, so on the motion, carried?
Carried.
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 Thank you. The next motion that was we were given notice of was by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor McKenney. Councillor Fleury, if you'd like to introduce your motion, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Whereas drug use, overdoses, and addiction continue to be a problem in the City of Ottawa, with overdose emergency departments visits that have almost quadrupled and hospitalization rates that have more than doubled between 2009 and 2019, with fentanyl and analogs implicating in almost 73% of opioid-related deaths. Entendu que les données locales de vérification des drogues.
Whereas local drug checking data from Sandy Hills CTS indicates that 96.7% of drugs bought as opioid and 42.2% of drugs bought as stimulants contain illicit fentanyl analogs, or other synthetic opioids. Attendu qu'en raison...
Increased cost to government for services such as shelter, healthcare, and emergency services, attendu qu'en raison de la consommation des drogues de surdose et de toxicomanie, les coûts associés au refuge.
Whereas drug use, overdoses, and addiction continue to increase costs to governments for services such as shelter, healthcare, and emergency services, and whereas addiction issues have also been destructive to communities and their economic well-being due to rising crime and violence associated with drug trade,
been destructive to communities and their economic well-being due to rising crime and violence associated with drug trade, whereas Ottawa Intercity Health, as a community health partner of the City of Ottawa, aims to improve the health and access to health care for people who are chronically homeless and integrate health care services so that homeless individuals can receive the same quality of health care as other Canadians. Whereas since August 2017, Dr. Jeff Turnbull and Ottawa Intercity Health successfully launched Canada's first ever managed opioid program in Ottawa, providing controlled amounts of pharmaceutical-grade narcotics. This prescription of a narcotic is referred to as providing a safe supply, housing, and other supports for 25 individuals, with positive impacts and successes for individuals, including stabilizing lives and decreasing crises and decreasing petty crime in our communities. Entendu que la mise en place du programme.
Whereas we used to have 3 overdoses a week, and that other drug consumers are asking for a space in that program.
19 by Catherine Latham covered the positive impacts and individual successes of the small-scale pilot project and its positive impacts on stabilizing the lives of those with addictions in Ottawa. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has further demonstrated the lack of supports for our communities, for our city's most vulnerable, and has also highlighted the vulnerabilities in communities where petty crime and panhandling are a main source of income to fuel addictions, which are increasingly impacting small businesses and residents. Entendu que le fait d'offrir un approvisionnement sûr en drogue et des consommateurs.
Whereas offering a safe supply of drugs to users will save lives and reduce the community impacts of addictions.
Ottawa take action to expand the safe supply of drugs to the population in Ottawa that meets the criteria for those most in need by asking the mayor to write to the provincial and federal ministers of health, asking them to implement and fund the expansion of safe supply in Ottawa to provide immediate supports to people who use drugs and decrease burdens on communities experiencing the impacts of addiction.
Okay. Who else would like to speak to this?
Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't mind speaking to it as chair of OPH.
Yes, I was just going to, I had your name written down here. Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor McKenney. I'd also like to just speak to it before we vote.
Yeah, okay. So Councillor McKenney is the seconder if you'd speak, and then we'll go to Councillor Eglai and then anyone else.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to Councillor Fleury for bringing this forward. You know, this obviously on the street, and when we're thinking about the impact on neighborhoods, it does affect our neighborhoods probably more than anywhere else. We see those impacts every day, and residents certainly in the ward that I represent want to support people who have addictions, who are, underhoused or unhoused and need treatment centers and need supervised consumption. But they also recognize that we cannot in any way police our way out of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And they don't want that. We want something different. We want to support people who use drugs. And I believe that that's the case across the city. This is an issue that, while it's maybe more apparent in some neighborhoods, it does affect residents right across the city who deal with addictions and today are dealing with a much more toxic and dangerous drug supply. So I think, if I'm not sure that there's another group, another demographic that we would allow to perish, allow to die at the same rate that we do with people who have addictions. And it happens daily. We just don't hear about it. I had about 12 people since in the last 4 or 5 weeks who have died of overdoses that I know of. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for them, for their families, for the community. And this is just asking for a safe supply. This is ensuring that people with addictions, like any other illness, if you need help, if you need medication, you can get a safe supply of medication. We would never allow for dirty needles for somebody who needed to inject for any other reason. We would not accept an unsafe supply of drugs for anyone else. And I think that asking for us to go to the federal government to ask for this to be extended into our city is a humanitarian and need, and it shows that we care about everybody in this city. So I thank all of my colleagues for considering this in a very thoughtful way, and I think that when I think about our city and where we've moved from over the last 15 years on this, it's been exceptional, and this is the next step that we can take. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my two colleagues for moving this motion. I just wanted to, for anybody who is concerned about this motion or has questions about this motion, I can say that Ottawa Public Health has been engaged on this file and on this project and is supportive of it, absolutely. We've seen the successes. We actually, Ottawa Public Health has been in the process for some time of seeking additional funding from other levels of government to assist on this very file. So again, Ottawa Public Health again is aware, supportive, has seen the good that this approach uses. Or has led to the successes and the benefits. So I can tell you that I wholeheartedly support this motion, both as councillor and as chair of OPH, and I hope that you do as well.
Thank you, councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak to Conseiller Fleury's motion?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hubley?
And Elton Theory as well.
Okay. Councillor Hubley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor McKenney that we can't police ourselves out of this issue, that it requires more than a single approach to it. Personally, I believe that treatment and supports for users of drugs are needed and need to be expanded beyond what's available today. I do not, however, believe that municipal taxpayers should take on the role of basically being the drug dealer. I don't like the idea of using tax dollars, especially at this time when, as the treasurer is updated as on how much money we're losing, $1 million a day in this pandemic situation. I really don't feel comfortable with tax dollars going towards buying drugs. Therefore, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to dissent on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm wondering if my colleagues who have moved the motion and second the motion will accept a friendly amendment. And I'm not speaking about competing interests or a group against another group, but we hear time and time again some of our seniors, some of our folks who's on fixed income, some of the folks who's having a challenge to even buy the stripes for their diabetes, or would they be open to include in your request for help in this one to include all farmers, farmer care need for our community? Again, I'm not trying to compete one against the other. I understand. I was on the police board for 15 years, and surely to God, we know we cannot police our way out of this. We have to deal with it and face it. But I can't honestly, with a clear conscience, say, yeah, I will support this, but we will leave the senior in a rural area who's, she can't afford to buy her insulin or, without support or help. If they can be meant to include other needs in the community, because it's not just that small group is in need. I think there's a need right across the city.
Okay, so Councillor Fleury, if you want to consider that, and I'll ask for other people who would like to speak on the issue. Anyone else? Okay, so Councillor Fleury, there's a request by Councillor El-Shantiri to amend your motion. Do you have the word?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As much as I recognize the issue of farmer care, and that's a national debate that's happening now, I'm glad to support any motion that my colleague would bring on that front. I also don't want to confuse the issue. There's a lot of costs that today, as a society, we're enduring by the illicit drug use and addictions, from our police response to emergency rooms to paramedics to courts. So I'm not proposing any new dollars on this. This is a provincial, it's in the provincial realm in terms of the health response. And as part of the direction, I wouldn't see that as friendly, although I would support a motion that Councillor Shantiri could move as it relates to access to affordable medication.
Okay, so there's not agreement on that, Councillor. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion?
I would ask for ayes and nays, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so the motion is by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor McKenney. Yeas and nays, please.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
No.
Councillor DeRuse.
No.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli, Councillor Deans, Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Egli.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
18 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you. Next is a motion by Councillor Leeper, seconded by Councillor Brockington. Councillor Leeper, if you'd like to introduce the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. This is a motion to move some money out of an envelope that I have for affordable housing in the ward that is made up of Section 37 money in order to help fund a sidewalk elsewhere in the ward. So a bit of a shuffle within the Section 37 agreement. A developer has offered to partially fund a sidewalk, and I've been scrambling to find a funding source to get the whole thing funded. So I'm dipping into the affordable housing part of this Section 37 agreement. I do have, though, in a few weeks, I'll be supporting the Trinity proposal that is at Gladstone and Loretta, and that will give my affordable housing fund a big boost. It's not spoken for currently. There are no projects that are anticipated to use that money immediately. So whereas the owner of the land in 1960 Scott Street was party to Section 37 agreements with the City of Ottawa.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, sorry, I think everyone sees the motion, so you don't have to read it.
Yeah.
Maybe just therefore be a result.
Therefore be it resolved, the Council approved the redistribution of the existing funds in the following manner. A $50,000 be directed from the existing Ward 15 specific fund for affordable housing towards the Elm Grove Avenue sidewalk project.
Okay, does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Brogdon, do you want to speak as the seconder?
No, thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? I'm just, I'll support it. I'm a little leery of taking money out of affordable housing to put in a sidewalk. That seems a little...
As am I. We have the opportunity to build the sidewalk, and without funding, unfortunately, I wasn't able to secure it out of any envelopes of the city after speaking with staff. So it will be replenished in relatively short order.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak on the item? So
do we have a staff comment on this? This money will be returned to the housing?
Mr. Willis?
Mr. Mayor, staff have no concerns with the motion. This is not unusual for councillors that over time find more useful and timely projects to move those funds to, so we have no concerns. I can't comment on the balance of the pool. I don't know if Ms. Gray is available to do that.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the motion? Carried?
Carried.
Any dissents? Okay, we have a number of motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure, so we'll go through them as we receive them. The first one is by myself, seconded by Councillor Tierney as Chair of the Transportation Committee, with respect to patios. Obviously timely because we're entering patio season, although restaurants are not open yet. On suspension, carried?
Carried.
Any dissents?
Carried.
Sorry? No? Okay. So I'm not going to, I'll read the be it therefore resolved because you all have a copy of it. This is to help the restaurant industry. So it's be it resolved that Council approve the following. Waive the daily rate for right-of-way patios and tourist kiosks and the annual permit fee for cafe seating permits for 2020. However, continue to collect the permit application fee of $62 to ensure that permits are required. Fund the $282,000 shortfall in budgeted revenue from unfilled vacancies and PIED. Amend the right-of-way patio bylaw that for 2020 only an applicant to the cafe seating program may request an unlimited amount of cafe seating permits to expand beyond the 4-table, 8-seat cap where space exists at the discretion of the general manager of PIED. Amend the right-of-way patio bylaw for 2020 only such that new applications within 90 meters of residential properties that require public consultation will pay a fee of $340 modeled on the first-time patio permit fee rather than the current fee of $567, and that staff be directed to develop a business process such that public consultation be completed within 10 business days of the receipt of the patio application with the delegation of authority of the business process to be given to the general manager, and direct staff to review opportunities for patios and retail operations on private property to expand into abutting parking lots or other private property for 2020 only or in the right-of-way where possible, and bring forward ways and means to achieve this to Transportation Committee on June 3rd. Councillor Tierney, would you like to offer a comment as the seconder and chair of the committee?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As this has been circulating, I've heard from many businesses that are very thankful to see some kind of assistance from the city on this. I've even spoken to some businesses on Elgin Street that have some parking lot space out back that hope to take advantage of this and just try to keep the lights on by servicing some of their people within the community. So I hope to have a unanimous consent from council on this, and I look forward to what staff will bring forward to Transportation Committee next week.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tierney. Others who wish to speak on the motion?
It's Councillor Leeper.
Councillor Leeper, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this, and I know we need to do what we can to help our local restaurants. I do have one question with respect to the funding source. $280,000 is available through an unfilled vacancy in the planning and infrastructure branch. What are those positions? We have a very heavy workload ahead. What unfilled vacancies are those?
Mr. Willis?
Mr. Mayor, there actually is a number of vacancies that we are delaying hiring until later in the year. So it's a series of fractions of jobs delayed by several months, and you add them up, it's enough to pay for this request. So we're delaying hiring in many areas of the department.
Okay, I think that's worth a bigger discussion at another time with respect to making sure we're staffed enough to fulfill the promise of much more certainty in zoning that we were just talking about. But I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I as you know, I'm a bit of a broken record on this. I want, when people bring forward motions, to find a revenue source. So that was the revenue source that we found to help pay for this. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councillor Elshantiri.
Yes, first of all, thanks to you and Councillor Tierney, the Chair of Transportation, for doing this. As you know, as your representative on Ottawa Council of BIA, this is very important. Also, quite honestly, we're not sure when the season begins, and we normally prorate the cost. So, first of all, it's a step in the right direction, and I hope this will not be the only one we can do, because if we can do other things to help those businesses, especially the one with the patio and serving on their patio, they are suffering now the most. So anything we can do, not just waiving the patio fee, perhaps make it easy for reopening, try to help them to find protective equipment for themselves and their staff and their customers. I think that will be a step in the right direction. But thank you for doing this.
Okay, thank you. Des autres questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Oh, it's Councillor Dudas. If I can.
Yes, Councillor. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank yourself and Chair Tierney and Councillor Elshantiri for all the work that's been going on to get this, but also Steve Willis and his team, because we've been listening to the BIAs, we've been listening to the Board of Trade, to the festival groups, to the cultural groups, and all of our businesses. And this is the time that they need the support the most. And I know this is a step in the right direction, and there's much more to come, and that Steve Willis will be releasing a more fulsome plan. But we need to do everything we can within our ability to support our small businesses, our local businesses, because we can't sit back and watch them close. These are business owners that live in our community and support employees that work and thrive in our community. So I'm very happy to see this. I'm glad to see it's the first in many steps that I know the city will be taking to address this, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Great, thank you, and thank you for your leadership and support of the Economic Task Force as well, Councillor, along with Councillor Elshantiri. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires?
Any other comments?
Just one quick question. With regard to the right-of-way portion of this, I'm in support of the motion, but with regard to the right-of-way approach, is that meant for councillors to pay for out of their own budgets, or is that funding that would come from somewhere else?
I didn't catch your question, Councillor.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the right-of-way portion, is that, if we're blocking off right-of-way portions, is that something that would come out of councillors' budgets, or would that come from another source?
No, this isn't closing a roadway. It's just putting a patio on it, similar to what's beside the works on Richmond Road and the Ministry of Coffee. I think the Glebe had one was on 2nd Avenue, 2nd and Bank, for instance, in a parking stall. Okay, so on the motion?
Okay, thanks.
Carried?
I would like, no.
Sorry?
Can we do, Mr. Mayor, can we have the ayes and nays for the record on the motion?
Yeah, if you ask for it, sure.
Yes,
okay.
please.
Yeas and nays on the motion, please.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Moffat.
Yep.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse.
Yes.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Deans. Councillor McKenney.
Yep.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
21 yeas.
Thank you. Our next motion that requires suspension of the rules of procedure is moved by Councillor Brockington, seconded by myself. There's timeliness, obviously, because of the road safety action plan has to get moving. On suspension, carried. Any dissents?
Carried.
Councillor Brockington, you want to introduce your motion, please?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your support. Councillors, this is a motion before us. It's a public awareness campaign for road safety in residential communities. I'll just read the therefores and then I'll briefly introduce. So, therefore, be it resolved that Council direct staff and transportation services, specifically Safer Roads Ottawa, in consultation with public information and media relations, to develop a public awareness campaign, or PSA, related to road safety within residential communities, including targeted outreach to delivery companies to remind them of the need to obey speed limits, particularly within residential communities, and be it further resolved that staff explore additional targeted initiatives to protect vulnerable road users during this time in keeping with the goals of the Council-approved Road Safety Action Plan. Colleagues, very briefly, we have, of course, basically everyone at home now with schools closed, people at home, people working from home, the majority of people, not everyone. And we have vulnerable road users out on the streets enjoying the nice weather, kids, families, older adults, particularly pedestrians and cyclists. And what I've heard this month, particularly from my families, is not only the speeding issue that we have on arterial roads that the police are trying to address through Operation Overwatch, but the speed on residential streets. And it's not exclusively to delivery companies, but certainly our delivery companies are at their own record capacities for delivering, and the speeds observed in many of our communities is completely unacceptable. Operation Overwatch issued a presser today that for the first month of their work, 823 speeding tickets issued, 36 charges for stunt driving, 112 warnings in the first month alone. And we know that road safety and speeding is one of our #1 issues in our residential communities. So this complements what the police are doing. Deputy Chief Bell, who I spoke with yesterday, supports this motion. He appreciates that it will complement the work they're doing, and whatever we can do as a city using our existing resources through our communications and media department to get the message out that when you're in residential communities, especially now, when so many people are at home, you've got to slow down and obey those speed limits. So, Mr. Mayor, that in essence of the motion that I'm proposing today.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does anyone wish to speak to the matter? So on the motion, carried?
Carried.
Any dissents? Okay. Next motion requiring suspension of the rules is a motion by Councillor DeRuse, seconded by Councillor Luloff, with respect to electronic continuation of remote committees and council meetings. So on suspension, carried?
Carried.
Any dissents? Councillor DeRuse, do you want to introduce the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion from the clerk. Of course, it's nothing different than what we're doing now concerning committees and council. On top of that, we will be extending further those meetings till August 31st because we have the state of emergency still on. And we also, you notice that we also added to be resolved that also the city clerk, we directed him, of course, after so many councillors have been talking with us, and I know Councillor Turney has been pushing us for a Zoom meeting or some other tools like Team or Skype. So the clerk will be looking into those and come back to us. So that's in a nutshell what is the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Luloff is the seconder, excuse me.
No, I think that the motion speaks for itself, Mr. Mayor. It's important that we meet. And so, I would encourage everyone to support this.
Okay, anyone else?
Councillor Fleury?
Yeah, Councillor Fleury.
Just a question to the clerk. We've had very successful planning committee meeting on Zoom, and I wonder how come it's not. It's been challenging to use the same technology for council. Just point of clarity on the technology.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think a point of clarity is required. I sent out a memo yesterday to all members of council, I believe, with regards to this matter. But the new direction, should council pass it, would require me to bring back a report with regards to a possibility of a Zoom, Skype, or Microsoft Teams meeting in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else? So on the motion, carried?
Carried.
Any dissents?
Carried.
No dissents, okay. Next motion is by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor El-Shantiri. There's a timeliness to this issue on suspension. Carried?
Carried.
Any dissents? No. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thank you. This is a bit of a convoluted issue that goes back over a decade, but it's a development charge matter that we've been trying to resolve for many years. So whereas on June 14th, 2017, City Council approved a report for an adjusted development charge rate for 1229 Dwyer Hill Road, and whereas the report required the receipt of building permits prior to December 31st, 2017, as well as delegated authority for extension of this time period to the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development, and whereas through this delegated authority, the General Manager has extended the expiry date to May 31st, 2020, and whereas the developer is close to rectifying all issues but has not yet been able to finalize building permits, and whereas the developer has indicated a willingness to pay the full amount of the June 14th, 2017 approved development charge amount in advance of the building permits being issued for the city to hold in trust, therefore be it resolved, Council approve the advance payment of development charges for 1229 Dwyer Hill Road in the amount of $200,180.50. Those 50 cents are important. Prior to May 31st, 2020, be considered as satisfying the requirements set out in the report. That's it.
Okay. Councillor El-Shantiri is the seconder. Would you like to say anything?
No, Mr. Mayor, this is just to correct something. I think Councillor Moffat worked with the resident and staff on it, so I think that's all good.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? So on the motion, carried?
Carried.
Any dissents?
Carried.
No dissents, okay. Next is City of Ottawa Food Garden Project, obviously time sensitive because it's planting season. On suspension? Carried? Any dissents? Okay, Councillor Kavanagh moved the motion, signed by Councillor Drews. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll just read it out. Whereas COVID-19 has led to significant and increased food and income insecurity in Ottawa, whereas the demand for community food production has also increased in Ottawa to address these concerns, whereas Ottawa City Council and Ottawa Public Health have recognized the need for community food production and publicly supported the opening of the community gardens across Ontario and within Ottawa, whereas the City of Ottawa already funds and partners with Just Foods on their community gardening network and community gardening development funds to enhance the capacity of the community food production in Ottawa, whereas demand for households in Ottawa for assistance to garden has surpassed the capacity of Just Food staff and volunteers to meet in a timely fashion given the short growing season and need for planting to happen in the next few weeks. Whereas Just Foods has confirmed the purchase of $5,000 worth of seed for distribution to Ottawa families with the goal of serving a minimum of 3,000 families. Whereas Just Foods has sourced confirmed supplies for this project with partners including Greeley Sand and Gravel, who has committed $25,000 donation in soil. Whereas the city, through its Human Needs Task Force, has funded Volunteer Ottawa to recruit, train, and place volunteers during the pandemic. Whereas accessing seed and soil is a barrier for many low-income families in Ottawa, and the City of Ottawa wishes to support strategies that mitigate the pressures on the emergency food distribution channels in Ottawa and build food security and community resiliency long-term. Whereas Ottawa's food security partners have established community and social networks to outreach to low-income families struggling with food insecurity. Whereas the Ottawa Food Policy Council is supportive of the City of Ottawa providing COVID-19 emergency support for household food production in addition to opening community gardens, particularly for families with long-term and new income insecurity. Whereas similar strategies have been usually successful, that's my addition, in municipalities across Canada, including Brampton, Ontario, Victoria, BC. Therefore, be it resolved that Human Needs Task Force work with Just Foods to identify solutions to funding the required purchase of soil bags, and seed envelopes, and identify immediate human resource volunteer solutions required to support the communications with families, delivered to families, packaging of seed and soil, and coordinating locations across Ottawa for pickup for those families who can. And I want to thank my seconder, Councillor Deroux, for that, for his part. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Deroux.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to thank Councillor Kavanagh also for working on this project with Just Food and myself, and we have a few other partners. This is a very hard time for a lot of people in the community, and I just want to mention that Greeley Sand and Gravel approached me during COVID, and they want to make sure our community garden accelerate and be able to plant as usual. We live in a rural community, and we have a lot of farm in our community. Again, food source is very important. So him and his wife, Brent Piper and Donna, they're very fortunate to help our community, and I'm very happy to see. I'm proud of them to be contributing to this project. So I wish all my colleagues they will support that. I also want to thank the Human Needs Task Force for taking this on.
Thank you, Councillor. And whose ward is Greeley Sand and Gravel in?
It's in Ward 20. It's on Elbruscut in my ward.
It's a great local company. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? No. Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, we should carry this motion unanimously because it's a good day when Teresa and George have the same name on the same motion.
Teresa, basically, she did that in purpose strategically.
I'm calling the Guinness Book of Records for this one. So on the Kavanagh-Deroux motion. Carried?
Carried.
Does anyone else have a motion requiring suspension of the rules of procedure? Okay, notice is a motion for consideration at subsequent meeting avec des motions pour examen à réunion subséquente. Councillor, myself, seconded by Councillor Dudas. I'll just go over it. Basically, we'd like to put forward a motion that's required to ensure that Councillor Brockington has the right to stand for election to the AMO Board of Directors as a Director, Regional and Single-Tier Caucus. So I don't think there's time sensitivity to this, so we can deal with this at the next meeting. Anyone else have a notice of motion for consideration of subsequent meeting? Notice of intent, avis d'intention, notice of intent from the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation to hold the annual general meeting of the shareholder at the council meeting scheduled for June 10th, 2020. Notice of intent from Marché d'Ottawa, Ottawa Markets, Municipal Services Corporation to hold its annual meeting of the member during the City Council meeting of June 10th, 2020. Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Councillor Moffat, please.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
Wow, that's another first. Congratulations. Félicitations. Félicitations.
Congratulations.
Carried? Carried. Any dissents? Confirmation bylaw, règlement de ratification, conseiller Moffat et Dudas, s'il vous plaît.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of May 27th, 2020. Oh, your accent's perfect. Don't you think so, Mr. Fleury, Mr. Cloutier? Oh, yes, very, very good. Fantastic. Bravo, wonderful.
One written inquiry from, on the motion. I got so taken away by La Langue de Molière. Carried?
Okay.
Any dissents? I have one written inquiry from Councillor Leeper. Councillor Leeper?
Thanks, Mayor. At its meeting on May 27th, Council approved a rezoning to permit a 4th unit in a triplex already built at 341 and 343 Tweedsmuir. In this and similar rezonings, when a building permit has already been granted prior to the rezoning, are development charges paid on the newly approved unit? What is the mechanism in place for ensuring that the required fees are paid in these instances throughout the city?
Okay, thank you. For members of the public and the media availability with Dr. Etches and city staff and myself will take place at 5:30, which is in 15 minutes' time. Councillor Moffat, adjournment, please.
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of May 27, 2020 be adjourned.
On the motion, carried. Any dissents?
Carried. Oh my God.
Any dissents? Thank you, and thanks to Caitlin and the staff for working through the technical difficulties. Appreciate it. Meeting adjourned. Merci beaucoup.